Hi, I'd like to welcome everyone to another GingerGM video. Um, this is another game I played from the 4NCL quite recently, so about a week ago. It was quite an interesting game because it was a new system, quite a new system against the King's Indian defence. And this is one defence which I have kind of struggled against in the past, playing against this very popular defence that Black plays. And I think I've come up with an interesting system which avoids most of the sort of mainline theory, yet gives White good chances of holding the edge. Now, my opponent in this game was a very talented youngster, James Jackson, from England, who's improving rapidly. I think he's only an FM, just gained his FM title, and his ELO rating is only about 2250, but his ECF rating is, if it's going to be compared to his ELO rating, is so much higher. And he's clearly an improving player and clearly a big talent. He's someone who's plays very actively. His theory seems to be good and just seems to be going from strength to strength. So not an easy game, not an easy game at all. So let's go through the opening. I played c4. Now, the reason I played c4 was I had a game against my opponent before where he played the modern Benoni, which ended in a draw. And it's a lot harder for black to reach a modern Benoni position if you don't go d4 straight away. So it's really a move order trick. And now I'm quite flexible with my opening. So when you know what your opponent's going to play in the opening, it's often a good idea to try to trick him with sort of a move order trick. And this is precisely what I was aiming to do here. And we quickly reach the King's Indian defence, so let's not mess about. We'll go straight into the action, g6. Now I could play quieter, obviously, with g3, which is something I played when I was about 12 up to the age of 16, the Botvinnik system of the English. But to be honest, it's really very quiet system, and it doesn't, with correct play, offer white any kind of advantage. It's also really boring, and we don't want to do boring stuff all the time. We've got to get some action in. So main line, e4, and now my opponent plays d6. So in this position, there are so many moves. A number of moves have been tried. The main line is with knight to f3 and knight to bishop to e2. And there's so much theory in this. f3, the same variation. I think Gufeld once said about the move f3. Gufeld, a strong Russian grandmaster who, well, he didn't think much of the move f3. He said, where's the knight on g1 going to go if you play the move f3? So he was not a big supporter of that. You have the four pawns variation with f4. There's just loads and loads and loads of variations you can play. Now, myself in the past, I've played h4 here, and this was one move I was attracted about. Now, the reason I came to the move I played in this game is that I've also tried some plans based on the move g4. Not immediately, but after bishop e2, g4. And the point behind this move is actually more positional than attacking. When you have a pawn on g4 in the King's Indian, it works against black's main pawn break. Now, a typical King's Indian structure is something that's reached after the moves. Let's just put some moves on the board. So, I don't know, knight f3, castles, bishop e2, the main line, and now e5, d5. And this is, I'd say, a typical King's Indian pawn structure where the middle of the board is locked and white has space on the queen side, so white has space to advance with c5. This is white's main break, and this is where white often plays, and black's main break is the move f5, trying to create an attack, going counterplay on that side of the board. So black often goes like knight e8 and f5. Now the idea behind my plan of going early g4 is to make it harder for black to ever achieve the f5 break, because if we ever get this kind of position where black goes f5, I can take with a g pawn. So it's actually positionally founded, this idea of going g4. It's not so crazy. But rather than going g4 quickly, I've kind of found some slight improvements on this. So bishop e2, my opponent castled, and now rather than g4 here, bishop to e3. So finishing my development before playing g4. You'll find that most King's Indian players play the move e5 here. c5 is another idea But in this position, e5 is very interesting and probably offers white a small advantage with no or little risk. So e5 is more common, and now d5, so we get this typical King's Indian position. And again, my point is, if the knight goes to e8 in this type of structure, I'm going to go g4. And I want to meet f5 with g takes f5, and when my opponent takes with g pawn, I don't have to castle kingside, and I have the open g file to attack along. So this is my general idea. My opponent played the best move, knight to a6, trying to get his knight to this c5 square, a typical idea in the King's Indian defense. And now g4, so continuing my plan. Knight to c5, attacking e4. So now I have to defend e4, pawn to f3, just boosting my position. Now ideally I'd like to play the move knight here to h3, knight to f2. The knight is best placed on f2, and then I'd like to gain some space on the king side with h4, h5, which can lead to a dangerous attack, but this is not really the area of the board white often plays on. In actual fact, later on in the game, I want to play on the queen side, so I want to play the move b4 and advance with c5. This is where I have more space. But really, I'm trying to control both areas of the board with this plan. Now, b4 is the immediate threat. My opponent stopped that with a5. And now I tried a new idea. I tried queen to d2. My opponent played a very good move here, I think, showing, I don't know if he prepared this line, James Jackson, but showing that he's clearly a strong talent and clearly has good understanding of certain positions. Now, most players go knight e8 against me here, but now I can castle queenside, and I think white should have a very pleasant position after something like pawn f5, takes, and of course black just seems to have weakened his king, so this should be good for white, and I have more space on the queen side, so I can play on both sides of the board. This should give white a slight advantage. My opponent played a very interesting move, h5. In future, I expect I'd either play something like, I'd probably play g5 here, and if knight d7, just castle queenside. And again, maybe white can claim a small advantage because black's a little bit cramped here, but it's not a big advantage. Long-term plan of going b4, a3 and b4, but that's going to take me a lot of time to achieve that. Instead, I found a very interesting move that, surprisingly enough, I analysed once before. So I analysed this with, I think, Fritz 8. And since that time, I haven't bothered to analyse the position again. So it was a bit strange because I was following my analysis there, and I suddenly reached positions where I thought, well, this is what the computer recommended for white, but actually my position is just a load of rubbish. So it shows you not to blindly follow computers, and the idea I followed was knight to h3. Very interesting. My opponent takes on g4, and now knight to f2. The point being, if my opponent catches another pawn, I just go bishop takes f3, and I have a monstrous attack here. I can go h4, h5. Let's just remove some of the paint colours off the board here. So, yeah, my main idea here is to castle queenside, go h4, h5, and just checkmate black. I think this is so dangerous. Black should not take this extra pawn. My opponent played another excellent move, knight to h5. Again, showing very good understanding of the position. Pawn takes g4, knight to f4. And his idea is, well, if I win a pawn here with bishop takes knight, pawn takes, queen takes, he has opened up his monstrous bishop, the Dragon King's Indian bishop, on g7. And black should be doing extremely well here. It's certainly a position I don't think white should ever be playing. Really quite awful, actually. I was still following my preparation here, surprisingly enough. I went bishop to f3. And all I can remember in this position was that at some point the computer gives knight to e2, you swap off the knight on f4, and then you swap off the bishop and checkmate him. So I thought I was still quite happy here. I was playing very quickly. h4 is my immediate threat, so my opponent stops this with queen h4. I castle queenside immediately, and now my opponent played bishop to d7. And all of a sudden here, after following my normal analysis, I had probably a 40-minute think, one of the longest thinks in my life. Because I'm sure the computer said knight to e2 here, but I just couldn't get this move to work. And I suddenly realised, actually, in this position, even though Fritz 8 or whatever computer recommends going into this, that I think my position is just a load of rubbish. It's a load of crap. Why is it a load of rubbish here? Well, he's got a very easy plan. My opponent's simply going to go rook to b8 and b5. And he has a ready-made attack against my position. His knights are very strong. It's very hard to get rid of his knight on f4. And my position could easily crumble because my opponent has a very distinct plan. Now, I wanted to make knight to e2 work because I'm sure this is what the computer recommended. But I spent so much time on this, I just couldn't get it to work. For example, b5, why not? And now if knight takes f4, pawn takes, bishop takes f4, b takes c4, and if something like bishop to g5, he has the very strong move, queen to h8. And my position is completely collapsing here. This queen on h8 is a very strong piece. He's going rook to b8. It's rubbish. I don't have time for h4, h5 because b2 is dropping. I'm completely lost here. So there's a real dilemma here just to stay in the game. And I think I found maybe one of the only options to do that. I went rook on d to g1. And the idea was, well, my opponent should probably play bishop h6 here, just out of interest. But after rook b8, he's following his plan. I go g5. And after b5, I'd seen the following idea. I take on b5, bishop takes b5, and now rook to g4. This forces the queen to a bad square. He plays queen to h8, and now there's a major difference between this position and the one I previously showed with the queen on h8. The major difference is black has a pawn on e5. And this pawn on e5 blocks the potential of both these pieces, the g7 bishop and the queen on h8. So as long as I don't capture his knight on f4, as long as I leave that knight well alone, his queen especially, is going to be an awful piece. So all I need to do is play around the knight on f4 and keep his queen trapped on h8, and I assume that I should have a good position here. Now, to do this, I thought, well, bishop takes c5 is a good trade. It swaps off another one of his active pieces. And now after d takes c5, I really try to lock down the king side with h4. And the threat is probably h5 at some point and rook h4. So my opponent stops this idea of h5, knight to h5. And now, well, my rook's not doing much on this square, so I do a bit of rerouting now. Rook on g to g1. But yeah, okay, my opening has now been a success, only because I found the idea of putting his queen on h8 and leaving the knight on f4. So it's a very tough plan to find, this one, positionally speaking. Now I'm very confident because all of his pieces on the king side are just awful. So I'm playing really 3 pieces up here. So as long as I'm careful, my position should be good. I just need to maneuver around my pieces to the best squares. So now we had a bit of maneuvering. My opponent goes here, and now my knight comes to d1. So this is the first maneuver. My knight comes to e3, and then either into c4, d5, even f4 or g4. Great potential on the e3 square. I mean, it's safest on c4 because this square on c4 because it defends the b2 square. Now, I was most concerned here about rook to b4. We idea trying to put the rook on d4. I thought this is what my opponent should try. So I was quite happily surprised to see a4. This allows me to play a3, stopping his plan. My opponent tries to get his bishop in the game, and now my knight comes to e3. Probably coming to c4. My opponent aims to get active here with c4 himself. So this is a good try to get his bishop to the d4 square. But now I played the very tricky move, pawn to d6. And the intention here is, well, if he takes this with his bishop, then I simply use a bit of tactics here to get a winning position. Bishop takes h5, queen takes h5, and now, because of my d6 move, I've gained control of the d5 square, so I can play knight to d5. A knight to f6 check is going to win a piece, at least. So he can't play this. So after d6, he had to play c6. And this way I've kept his bishop trapped in, and his queen is still trapped in, and his knight's trapped in. So I'm just trying to play positionally against these 3 pieces whilst improving the positioning of my own pieces. So this is a good kind of thing to do when you're playing chess. Just try to keep your opponent inactive and improve your own pieces. Well, let's get on to the critical moment now, because my position is very good. Bishop e2. Idea of bringing my bishop maybe around to pressurize f7. And now, okay, I swapped off another one of his active pieces, his light square bishop. He tries to get his knight in the game, but it's too little too late. I go rook f1. The simple plan here is actually to sacrifice the exchange. So if rook d8, I was going to go just take off his only active piece, really, and get a position like this. And again, I'm just playing against the queen on h8. His queen on h8 just loses the game for him. So my opponent played bishop g7, and this stops me playing e5 if I take on f4. So I just push my pawn, and now, very nice position here. My opponent blundered with queen h5. I think his position's already hopeless here because my queen's coming into d6, and he's just playing two pieces down. But queen to h5 allows a quick tactic here. Knight to b6, and this wins material. The game finish, knight to e6. Well, it should be clear to see that if he takes this, I can get another queen, and we always like having two queens, and this is going to win every single piece on the board. So knight to e6, and now the game ended quite smoothly. I played actively here. My opponent has to really play something like knight d8. Now my queen comes in the position. Desperately tries to get his queen active by going to g4, but it's still a long way away from the action. Queen e8, king h7, and now it's time to just tear open his king position. h5, queen takes g5, king b1. Here, rook f5. The game is over. Takes here, king g6, queen g8. And the main threat here is rook to h6 with mate to follow. But also queen to h7 is very strong. Now, interesting game, I thought. Anyway, I mean, my opponent just got it. I mean, he played the opening stage extremely well. I mean, I think there was some key moments when I think he moved a little bit too quickly around the stage where I played rook to g1. This was at a critical moment. I played this move, and my opponent just continued with his plan of rook b8 and b5, which is very natural, but I don't think he's really taken into consideration my plan, and you've always got to really consider your opponent's plan. And as soon as my opponent's queen went to h8, I think I've taken control of the game. So that was quite critical, and it's very important from my perspective never to capture the knight on f4, because I've got to keep his bishop and his queen trapped in to the king's side. So that's very important for me not to allow that. But very good opening play from my opponent. Still, I think, a very interesting game, and some opening that I will study more in future. Maybe quite a useful weapon for anyone out there if you're struggling to find something to do against the King's Indian defence. So, hope you like that video. I'll probably do another one at some point in my life. Who knows when. Goodbye for now.